Hello, everyone. My name is Austin Belzer, and welcome to another interview from South by Southwest 2025. Today, I have the pleasure of talking to the director of The Tallest Dwarf, Julie Wyman. The Tallest Dwarf is a documentary about the little people community and the rumors of partial dwarfism in her family. You can watch the documentary during South by Southwest on March 10th, March 11th, or March 13th. Julie, welcome.
Thank you so much
Yeah,
for
no
having
problem.
me.
It's a pleasure to be talking to you. Um, you're my second interview out of South
Okay.
by so far.
Oh, wow.
Um, I think the other one was a a what was it? F Ups Anonymous was the other one so
Oh,
far,
cool.
and then
Great.
I've got
There's so
a few
many
more.
amazing films that I'm excited to see. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. I think I tallied it up yesterday, and there's 500 screenings or near
Holy
600.
moly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, yeah, I have to pick 20 from that 500 plus. It's been a journey to do that. Um, I initially had a list of 80, but yeah, it's great to be talking to you today. So let's just get right into it.
Sure.
I'd love to hear what initially inspired the documentary and your journey to investigate the notion of your family's history and the notion of partial dwarfism and the tallest dwarf.
I
Sure.
mean, the film really did start from a personal question. My proportions are different. I have short arms and you can't see it in this frame, but I have shorter arms and legs, a long torso. I was kind of bullied as a kid and called, Oompa Loompa and a lot of other things that little people get called. But I'm 5 feet tall as an adult, so I didn't have a diagnosis of any form of dwarfism. And I knew I inherited my body, my physique, my proportions from my dad and my grandma, but I didn't know if there was a name for it, if there are other people like us. And I always had a sense of being physically different and did not have a term for that or any connection to other people outside my family. So after years of being a filmmaker and actually making films about people who don't fit physically in lots of different ways, I made a film about a trans man before trans was in our cultural dialogue, and a film about a fat synchronized swimming troupe and super heavyweight woman weightlifter. It was kind of time for me to confront my own personal questions about my own body and where I fit in, and again, connecting to other people like us if they exist out there. And so I set foot into the little people community, and as I found my place, I just really entered a world that had its own big questions about what it means to be physically different, short statured, disabled, and how it feels and how to sort of find power and autonomy in that position when you're always being put on display. And kind of like I was bullied as a kid on a much larger scale, like socially, through history, through Hollywood, in medicine. And so my film became something that opened up into a story that's much bigger than myself.
Yeah, and you touched a little bit on it. Um, but I'd like to discuss, the tokenization. You talked about being bullied in school and things like that. I won't go too far into that, but I'd like to talk a little bit about how you went about uh, approaching reclaiming the narrative of little people in the documentary.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my stance, even starting this film, was that, and the reason I'm a filmmaker, in fact, is to bring bodies and stories to the screen that we don't see a lot. And I believe that, cinema is a great way to create a new form of beauty and a new experience of seeing different shapes, sizes, colors, all of us, even a model of a big range of body types and races as a form of beauty, as opposed to fitting one narrow standard as the idea of like one form of beauty. So I came into this project with that as a goal, and I guess, a politics really that I carry with me. And so even from the beginning, when I realized I was going to be asking questions about my own dwarfism and finding, making friends and community in the little people community, I also realized there was something pretty uncomfortable about bringing a camera in to this community. And as I got to know the history and also the present of things like reality TV now and before that, carnival freak shows, you know, court dwarfs, the history goes back to the beginning of human history, really. There's representations of little people, often in these positions of being entertainers, but in a way that's like laughed at, looked down upon. Um, you know, uh, I had a sense of that, and as I unpacked the history, I found it was even worse and more massive than I thought. And I realized that this film really needed to be explicit and also think about what it was doing by asking little people to be on camera, by putting myself on camera, by showing our bodies. Because one strategy is to just say, it's been flawed, representation has been flawed, so let's avoid cameras. That's a legit thing to decide. But my project is more like, how can we use visuals to flip the way we've been seeing and kind of instill power and agency? And I think part of the answer is to do it ourselves, and for me to like open up not only how I show myself, but to make a film that is about me and a group of little people artists deciding how to put our stories on screen, talking through our experiences and making these short film vignettes. So the feature doc kind of has some films within the film. There's a story of us, of the people I connect with, my new community, thinking about how we want to tell our stories. So I don't know
Yeah.
did I answer your question?
Yeah, tenfold. You talking about that reminds me of a Spirit Award speech from a few years ago. I forget what film it was. Oh, there was a documentary. I wish I remember the name of it, but it was from the point of view from someone who was using a wheelchair, and he said something similar. I remember in his Spirit Award speech when he won. It's
Was it
like,
maybe Reid Davenport with I Didn't See You There?
yes, yes.
It's funny because I
Um,
was thinking of his film when I said that. So maybe we have a psychic connection, but Reid's a good, I don't want to go on too long, but I'll just say like, Reid's a good friend and also an artist I respect so much. And I think he uses this pretty clear decision and he takes this position where he is showing us his world from his POV, right?
mhm,
But without showing himself. I think maybe we see him in a reflection once or twice. But it's a conscious effort to not visually be seen. Whereas
right.
I thought a lot about that. And also because a lot of the people I film with, they justified an appropriate like sense of like concern about what this doc was going to be and where it was going to go and what it was going to do and not do. And those were the cues to really listen to like, okay, I'm gonna, we're gonna, we are gonna work with the visual representation. We're not gonna eschew it or put it aside, but we're going to play with how we can flip it or turn it within itself, right? So it's kind of like being in the belly of the beast. Anyway, sorry, I just rambled a lot and you were
No, no,
talking.
it's good. I was just gonna say, I think he said something in his speech about films about us, not without us,
Yeah.
or something like that.
That's the basic, that's the rallying cry, or it's a really key, I guess, principle to disability, critical disability justice movements, which is, nothing about us without us. And, it's been the history of the world that decisions have been made for disabled people in terms of policy, treatment, representation, without bringing in people with that lived experience. It's a big legacy. And so, yeah, it feels time to change that really radically right now.
Yeah, especially right now. I think a lot of slam dance. I just got done with slam dance a couple days ago. Beautiful short. There called Audio Descript. Fantastic. But yeah. Speaking of what the world does without us, You
Yeah.
broached the topic of medical intervention a few times in the documentary, and
Yep.
I'd love to hear about how you navigate these these topics.
Yeah. Yeah. So there, there are, when I first was connecting to the little people community, I learned there were these new genetic therapies in development. There are pharmaceutical treatments that were being tested in clinical trials, and they were being tested to um, the measure of success of the drugs was how much height they added, if they would make little people taller. It happens that a lot of forms of dwarfism have a lot of medical complications, which are quite difficult to deal with. But these drugs weren't initially testing those, whether these drugs would improve those. They were testing would would this treatment make little people taller. And so for little people, sense of pride and identity and connection and history through their body shape and size, this idea of, trying to correct something that's not a problem felt like a form of, feels like, can feel like a form of eradication or, and it certainly can feel like an outside average height normalizing perspective of I know how to help you. Let me make you more like me. And and I don't say that lightly, but I guess it felt like this was a controversy. It was and is a controversial topic within the little people community because people feel different ways about it. And so that to me was really interesting because on so many levels, because as someone that has this, I knew that my physique was hereditary. I knew I'm not going to have kids. And so I'm the end of my family's line of whatever this body was. At the time, I didn't know. It is a form of dwarfism. I now know. But I was kind of the end of the line, and there wouldn't be anything more of this specific kind of body that I knew had been passed on. And so I had these questions about how do people in the community feel about this idea that there may be less of this kind of body type in the world in the future? How does it feel to be culturally in a place that's holding that concept and that whether you see it at some people think it would be great. And a lot of people feel it as a threat. And I felt it as a threat because to me, like I said, I like to uphold this idea that the world can and should have space and expect bodies of all types and abilities and mobilities and, disabilities. So, you know, I kind of went in with both a personal question, do I fit here? And also a more like almost journalistic question, how are people sitting with this idea? And a lot of people at the beginning were like, you're going to make a film that connects those two things? And it took a while. But what I ended up doing was rather than make a film that focuses on pharma, what people are doing with it, I really looked at the way the current medicine is being felt and held in community during the time I was filming. And then also what is the lineage of that, right? So there have been drugs in the past, human growth hormone and synthetic growth hormone, that have long and problematic histories, but also are used commonly now. So looking at those, looking at kind of how scientists feel about these kinds of developing these treatments, both like what kind of assumptions do they bring, but also what kinds of doubts might they have about the work they're doing? What concerns do they have? I wanted to know I wanted to know about the complications that scientists feel as they do this research. And so the film has sort of a through line that looks at that and talks about a few specific points along both the history and the present that I was filming during, of the community kind of grappling with how to be involved, if at all, how to embrace or explore different treatments that are available, and what are these treatments aligned with in terms of thinking about the social and medical model of disability. So that, this idea that you don't fit in the world. Do you change yourself to fit the world, or should the world, so that it can fit more people, right? And I think the disability justice movement is the social model, the second one of those, which is let's make our world accommodating and acceptable, accessible and supportive to all bodies. So yeah, and I think that's where my answer lies, but I also wanted to show that there's a wider spectrum of takes on that, right? There's some people in the film that don't feel that way, and I wanted to show that too.
Yeah, that actually leads greatly into my next question about community. You know, you talk about
Mm.
this cast of the little people community that is featured with in the film. I'd love to hear about the process of finding this community, how you went about that.
Yeah. Well, I knew about Little People of America, which is actually the world's largest advocacy group for skeletal dysplasia, which is the kind of larger category for types of dwarfism. There's 400 types of dwarfism. I didn't know that at the beginning, but I had heard of LP. And it does turn out that's kind of that's probably the main hub of what we call dwarf culture, maybe worldwide, but especially in the US. So, I started going to conferences quite ambivalently and awkwardly at first, not knowing if I was even okay to walk in the door, register, start talking to people. And as I started sharing my own kind of questions about my family and medical history, and started doing some of my own medical testing too. It, it, I I found I was quite welcome. Like I found that people were like, yes, this is not uncommon. Like you're taller than a lot of us, but there's a lot of people that don't have diagnoses. Come on in. Let's see what, welcome. And, so that was kind of an amazing entry, was just finding that welcome and commonality to even look around and connect. And then, I think what happened, maybe just naturally, is the people I connected most to and became friends with. Not all of them, but many of them are artists, because I'm an artist. So the LPA has a lot of, there's a whole sports organization that's in parallel in tandem with LPA. There's basically interest groups affinity groups within. And so there was the Dwarf Artist Coalition. And that was like, okay, yeah, I want to go there. And as soon as I did and started connecting to other artists, it was like a twofold connection, right? In terms of both having this shared body and social experience that I didn't have to explain. It was just the bottom line, understood connection, which was amazing. But then also finding a community of people that are creators, everything from musicians to poets to visual artists to other media makers. And that kind of became the hub of where I made some good friendships and also found collaborators for this film. And also I think maybe could contribute to the community. I've offered some workshops at the conferences. That's one of the scenes in the film where I lead a self-portraiture workshop at one of the conferences. But, I've been involved in other ways too. There's a committee that's working on archival preservation of the community's history, and I'm part of that committee, the history committee. So I kind of feel like I'm trying to both contribute where I can, but also those are the places I find connection. And that's out of some of those friendships grew this larger process I mentioned of trying to make these films with little people, artists and performers. And so again, it was like rather than going to any any members of the community and saying, hey, could I film your life story? It became, I did that a little bit, but it was also, can I film your story and perspective? But it also was, will you film with me? Will you collaborate with me and come up with stories to tell? And can we film our process of doing that together? And that's sort of becomes a bulk of a major through line in the film is that process, creative, filmic. And the other thing is like connecting with people that have really taken that archival history seriously and have collected these images that are problematic, right? Some of them are problematic, some probably wouldn't be ever seen that way. but kind of trying to own our history of representation. I heard about this artist who had done a pre-internet, massive collection of images, and he had passed away, but his wife is with us, and Leslie, and she was also someone who was at the announcement of when they discovered the gene for dwarfism. So she was someone that had this really interesting history that overlapped with both the scientific history and the artistic representational history. And so we started filming together about and exploring telling both parts of her story. So
Well,
yeah.
yeah, that's a great answer. Yeah,
I feel like
I
I'm
think
talking really long. I'm sorry. I know
oh,
we also don't
I,
have so much time.
I prefer it. I've said this I've said this before, but like I really like whenever somebody I interview talks more than I talk because it makes my job. I don't have to stand here direct to the camera asking all the questions, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so so no need to apologize. And I know we've already talked a little bit about well, a lot about represent little people representation in media.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't know, apologies if we already broached this, but I feel like there's going to be a lot of people coming to South by Southwest who maybe are will just kind of surf the documentary track
Yep. Yep.
and not really do a lot of like reading on descriptions.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear your thoughts on like what you would what you would love for them to walk away with if they've, you know, grown up seeing negative little people representation in media and how this documentary might I don't know, help.
I thank you. That's a great question. I want people to meet the cast of this film. It's an incredible group of people who have such kind of power and agency and like personality. Like there's a humor, there's a lot of humor, and there's a lot of kind of bonding that happens on camera. So you're getting to join in on and be like insiders as audience members to the a community of people that knows very well and has a lot of, I guess, agency, self-possession in terms of thinking about representing themselves and just being in the world. This is a question. This is a great question, and I wish I had a snappier answer to it. But I guess, I think what I want people to walk away from is seeing, meeting the people in my film, Sophia, Mark, Rachel, Leslie, Ellen, and Rebecca Chandler, and feeling their, being interested, loving them, being connected to them, caring about them. I think most important, I mean, one of the things that's most important to me is really for the film to create a new experience of seeing beauty, power, presence. And that's why it opens and closes with images of a group of us, little people dancing together, but in a way that I think feels very different from the conventional idea of, perform for me, dance for me, be a wrestler for me, do a crazy stunt for me. It's more bringing ourselves to the screen. Um, so yeah, I don't know if there's like a snappy way to say like you've never seen little people community like this, because that sounds creepy too, right?
Yeah.
But it is a very, I think it's a very personal and fun and kind of joyous that you get to enter in the film. And also a critical, smart world that, is going to see you to like engage on a new level. So I think it's it's playful in that way, like that it hopefully pokes a little or prods at like what it is to be there in the audience.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And then I'd love to get your thoughts on, you know, furthermore, on for filmmakers who are maybe making their first film and are from a marginalized community. What
Mm.
advice would you give to them to tell their authentic stories?
Yeah, thank you. That's another good one. Great question. For me, the important lesson was to trust myself and keep coming back to what I felt and knew, and even everything from my creeped out feelings of like, ooh, this is gawky, to my excited feelings of, ooh, we could do this, we could do that. So it's really like the gut, like steering by like a gut level sense of what you know. I would really encourage people to, yeah, dig deep and trust what they know and see, and what probably no one else can know and see in the same way. I think that's a lot of it. Took me a long time to make this film. Like I was, had already made a few films, lots of shorts, and it took kind of finding that courage to say, okay, this part of my life that I've been circling around for decades is worth telling. And I know there's something here. So I would encourage people to do the same, especially if they haven't seen their stories out there, especially if they're not conventional. It's quite difficult sometimes, especially now, to like sell and get support for those stories. And yet, the truer you can be to them, I think, the more you're giving the world something it really needs.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And if any filmmaker is watching this, I would say if you're neurodivergent like I am, I would love to see more documentaries that aren't maybe funded by Autism Speaks. Um,
Yeah,
I would love to see more of those. I'd love to review them. If filmmakers making something, I would love to cover it. Um,
awesome.
but yeah, I want to thank you, Julie, for taking the time
Yeah.
to discuss your documentary, The
Thank
Tallest
you.
Dwarf. Uh, for those who are going to be in Austin, you can watch the documentary during South by Southwest on March 10th, 11th, and 13th. I'll have a link to purchase tickets for any of the screenings in the description of this interview. But thank you again, Julie, for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Austin. It's been great talking with you. I really appreciate your
Same here.
questions. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
Thanks.
you have a great South by Southwest
Okay.
and enjoy.
Okay. Thanks a lot. I will.